Another round of stimulus checks? Is this true? How much would you be getting? What does this mean? Who's going to pay for this? Find out this and more on this episode of Panda Ponderings. Welcome to Wednesday, May 13th edition of Panda Ponderings. This is Phil coming back to you again with some information that you should know about and ponder on. Today's topic is a new proposed HEROES Act. It's a House of Representatives proposed bill, H.R. 6800. It was introduced yesterday, May 12th, by Representative Nita Lowey of New York. This is a little more complicated bill that includes a number of different areas, but it all falls within the category of making emergency supplemental appropriations for the fiscal year ending in September 30th of 2020. The HEROES Act, the word HEROES, it stands for Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions. By the way, there are people getting really mixed up in which HR bill this is referring to. In my research, I found a number of news sites which have referred to incorrect HR bill numbers. And again, this is HR 6800. Now, to be fair to them, there are an extraordinary amount of bills in the House of Representatives that use the acronym HERO or HEROES. So I guess they just like the way that it sounds, and it would make sense that they would get them confused. Anyways, so this particular bill is a $3 trillion stimulus package. Now, comparatively, the CARES Act, which is the one that gave most of us $1,200, well, it's a $2.2 trillion package. And that, at that time, was the largest ever stimulus package in the history of the United States. So with this HEROES Act, what's in it? All in all, there are 18 different divisions to this act. There is the General Coronavirus Recovery Supplemental Appropriations division, which is meaning it talks about where all of the $3 trillion is going to be going to. What's it going to be spent on, which departments, so on and so forth. It talks about revenue provisions, and this is where you're probably here for this part specifically. This is how you will be financially stimulated. They have areas where health provisions, retirement provisions, assistance for unemployed workers, assistance for agricultural producers, accountability and governance, veterans and service member provisions, small business provisions, essential worker, at-risk individuals and families and communities provisions. They have this HERO Act, which is cool. They have a family, workers, and community support provision. They have consumer protections and telecommunication provisions. They have a retire options for the Workers Act as part of it. They have educational provisions and other programs, and they have a HEROES Fund, which I think is a pretty cool thing. They also have child nutrition and other related programs. Now, there's way too much to go over everything that's in here, so I'll focus on the one area that you all came in here for, and that's the revenue provisions. The bottom line is this: for each person, you will get $1,200 individually or $2,400 for joint filings. And you can have up to 3 dependents, each getting up to $1,200. Now, this is important because in the CARES Act, they talked about children specifically. This one, they've expanded that description not just to children, but to dependents. And also, the CARES Act had each child up to $500. This one has each dependent up to $1,200. And there are also similar provisions of income qualifications, such as $75,000 per year for a single person, or $150,000 for a married couple of household income, or $112,500 for a single taxpayer filee that is head of household. And the checks would still be sent similar like the CARES Act, where it would go first through direct deposit, and then physical checks might be sent from that point forward. There are differences from this in the CARES Act, though. For instance, some of the taxpayers that did not receive a economic impact payment, that's what those stimulus checks were called in the CARES Act, because they didn't have a Social Security or a TIN number on their tax returns. They might not have put it for various reasons, but anyways, this has now changed in the HEROES Act by providing stimulus payments to all qualify people on a tax return. Also, for those of you who are unemployed and have been receiving unemployment benefits, this also continues the extension of $600 weekly unemployment expansion. This also includes some rent and mortgage assistance, including like funding for coronavirus testing in local areas. There's provisions for the Heroes Fund, which provides hazard pay for essential workers. They also have more support for small businesses with an expansion of the PPP, that payroll protection program. Anyways, let's hope this time that they don't botch this like they did in the previous ones, where clearly some companies that are not small businesses receive some of these loans and grants. At the same time, though, I will have you think about something really interesting. The parent company of Soup Plantation and Sweet Tomatoes, they closed all their restaurants permanently, and they were a company that never applied for any of the PPP loans because they felt it wasn't right for them to do so. But now they're going under. It'd be really interesting for us to consider, how do we protect companies like theirs and their 4,400 employees across the nation that are now out of a job. They don't qualify as a small business, so it makes sense that they wouldn't necessarily get this kind of protection loan. But at the same time, it's really hard for them to keep their business open in situations like now. Anyways, so all of that is all inside. If you want to see all of it, go to the link that I have below in the description and read it for yourself. It's a good hour-long read. It's pretty long, especially if you want to get into nitty-gritty and understand. There's a lot of good stuff. There's some bad, and you can make the judgments for yourself on how you want to think about it. But what I want you to ponder is this. How are we as a country going to pay for all this? Because it sounds great, right? Each person gets $1,200. And you know, we already got that in the CARES Act, and now we're going to follow up with an additional $1,200. And it makes sense when we talk about how, like, in certain states and country, certain parts of our country, that $1,200 just does not go far, right? It doesn't pay for a month of the living expenses of a person in, let's say, for instance, Massachusetts or California. It barely goes for half of that month. So it's great that we're getting all this, but how are we paying for all this? You got to remember, we're already $23 trillion in debt at the beginning of 2020. Now, with all that we're doing, we could be looking at an additional $5 trillion in debt just from adding both the CARES Act and this HEROES Act. Now, that's not even including debt that we might incur from other aspects of what we're doing in our country. And so I want to break it down for you a little bit. In the short term, here's how we're paying for it. Simple answer: bond sales. Now, it's kind of a complicated scenario, but the basic premise is this: we will sell trillions of dollars in treasury bonds. That's how we're doing. But what this means is that the problem is this now creates a siphoning of money away from other essential lending markets, including things like blue chip corporate bonds. So if we're selling off all these treasury bonds and people are buying these treasury bonds, then they wouldn't have the capital to buy other bonds that are necessary to keep some of those corporate companies alive. What this means then is, like, for instance, the Federal Reserve has to step in, and then the U.S. Central Bank, as you see recently, has stepped up its purchasing of various bonds in recent weeks. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, they called their latest bond buying plans as unlimited. This is a very sort of a borrowing mentality, which further pushes our national debt to a larger scale. The good news is that our interest rates are at a historic low, so it's really not that terrible of a time to add debt. However, let's first go there. Economists seem to think that we can still afford to incur this much debt at this time. And the rule of thumb has always been that a country's debt shouldn't exceed 90% of its gross domestic product, its GDP. So being that, let's say, 6 trillion out of the entire national debt, the entire 23 trillion, 6 trillion of that is money that our nation owes itself. So we don't have to worry about that. If you minus out the 6 trillion from the 23 trillion, we're at 17 trillion. And with including the CARES Act, we're looking at about $19 trillion. is so the 17 plus 2.2 trillion of the CARES Act is about $19 trillion. Our GDP last year was 21.7 trillion. So you can see that this means that we're already awfully close to that 90% mark. But here's the thing: if you add another 3 trillion from the HEROES Act, this will be problematic. Right now we're in a little bit of a mode of like robbing Peter to pay Paul. We just have to make sure that we don't rob too much of Peter or owe too much of Paul. And this is a hard balance. We don't know where you'll end up being when the time comes to start paying off these debts, but I can guarantee you that at the end of the day, all of this will come down to the American taxpayers paying for all of this. Just remember, free money isn't free. I never thought that, or maybe you never thought that such a simple thing of like a stimulus bill that gives you $1,200 would have such huge ramifications. That's why I want to inform you so that you can start to ponder about your actions, about the actions of our government, and be able to intelligently understand what's going on. Think about it, right? Like, understand the practicalities of what we're doing and the ramifications of what we're doing, and then you are better equipped to move forward from there. So, once again, this is PNDA Ponderings with Phil, and I hope that this gives you something to ponder about. Take care, be informed, you have choice, and you have responsibility. Bye-bye.